Who I am. I'm Dave Wolf. I'm the executive director here of Legacy of the Plains Museum. I have the extreme privilege. It went extreme and I couldn't come back. Extreme privilege to introduce Jerry Lucas. Not only is he one of our local historians, but he's also a great friend of mine, and I've learned a ton from him. He has a lot of great presentations. But growing up with the love of history, Jerry Lucas is an Army veteran who has worked as a teacher and the Postal Service employee before becoming a National Park Service Ranger at Scottsbluff National Monument, which I'm assuming, if you guys know, that's probably where you know him from. Now a volunteer, he prepares and presents programs to introduce park visitors to the people and events in the vicinity of the monument. Jerry takes pride and joy in sharing his stories and knowledge of the area, the state, and the American West. So we all give Jerry a nice hand of applause.
We're going to talk about unseen pioneers. And when I first proposed this as a title for a program ages ago, I was asked, what do you mean by unseen pioneers? I said, think about when we talk to visitors at Scottsbluff National Monument and we talk about the Western migration and the expansion history of America, we generally get responses about the European movement, Euro-American movement, the white Anglo-Saxon Yankee movement. And I said, there's a whole class of pioneers that we've forgotten, and that is the black pioneer. And the proposal still didn't quite hit the mark that I wanted it to with my supervisors, but I went ahead and did it anyways. As I said, we generally think of the European experience with migration, you know, the covered wagons, the family walking along the trail, and they're going to Oregon to settle, or California to pan for gold or whatever. But we think of the Euro-American experience. There's a whole class of this, of pioneers that have been out in the West almost as long as the Euro-Americans, and that is the black Americans. Their experience in the West starts when Spain, in around 1521, brings black slaves and introduces them into the colonial process in Mexico. In around 1601 to 1607, there was a black woman, free woman of color, who settled in Santa Fe. And she expressed one major concern, and that was that her European neighbors, the other Spaniards in the area, may not want her to be there and may try to do something to get her out of the way. 1804, two gentlemen put together a large group of people to go exploring up the Missouri River. They called the expedition the Corps of Discovery, and we're talking about Lewis and Clark. Among their number was one black man. His name was York. And on the entire expedition, anything that involved the decision of the whole group included his position, what he thought should be done. For the 2 years that they were out, you would think that by the time they got back to St. Louis, York would have been a free man. Wrong. For the remainder of his life, from what I can tell, he was still in bondage to, I think it was Meriwether Lewis. No, it was William Clark. Excuse me. Around 1823, President Andrew Jackson had the wonderful and great idea of exporting all the Native Americans from the United States, as we knew it then. Some 70,000 Native Americans were forced to leave the territory that they'd grown up in and move into what they call the Indian Territory, west of the Mississippi River, and even further into Oklahoma. Among those 70,000, there could have been anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 black people. Some of them were escaped slaves that had been accepted into the Native Society. Some of them may have been escaped slaves who had escaped into Native American societies and become slaves again. And some of them may have been free people of color that just went with the Native Americans. We talked about during that period, that after Lewis and Clark came back, the West opened up to the fur trade. And up on the upper Mississippi River, there was a place called Fort Union. And at Fort Union, there was a man by the name of Hawkins, who was a cook, a black man. Now, it is unknown if he was a slave or a free man, but it is presumed that he was a slave. But his master, or his owner, or however you want to look at it, is never identified. Years later, at this little place over in eastern Wyoming called the Fort on the Laramie, there's a black man that is a cook and also serving as a clerk, whose name is Hawkins. Presumably, might be the same guy that was cooking up in Fort Union. Again, though, it's not identified if he was a slave and who his master was, or if he was a free man. Moving on, 1824, 1823, a fur trading company run by William Ashley and Andrew Henry were going up the Missouri River, and they encountered two villages of Arikarock, and General Ashley wanted to do some trading with him. So in the process, Arikarock Indians could be viewed as less than honorable. Ashley had completed his trading and had gone back to his boats on the Mississippi, or on the Missouri, excuse me, to put together the supplies that he was going to trade for horses. And there's an attack on the men that he leaves on the shore. Among the men that are injured in this skirmish that lasts for some time, there was a black man that was injured. but he is unidentified. Down in Colorado, around this same time, there was a place called Bent's Fort. And there was a couple there, Charlotte and Dick Green, who were cook and blacksmith and all around general help. And there again, they are not identified as being free people of color or slaves. It is presumed that they were quite possibly slaves of Bent, but they were treated much better than what we typically view or think of slaves, how we think of them being treated. In 1814, there's a gentleman named William Bush who had been a soldier in the War of 1812, and he went from New Orleans up to Oregon with a group of men as part of their company. Catch here is that during the early territorial days and early statehood days, Oregon didn't allow black people in by constitution. I wonder how they changed that. And that information came to me from the Oregon State Black Pioneers Association, which I thought was kind of hilarious. You got a constitutional amendment outlawing blacks from entering the state. How do you enforce it? And there's another incident. Jedediah Smith worked for William Ashley in around 1826, late 1825, 1826. He took off with a small company of men and went to this place called California. Now, California at that time was a Spanish colony, and Americans weren't exactly welcome. But Smith made it in and out without, well, he did get arrested and put in jail. But among his number, there was a black man. And I don't remember that this black man was identified by name, but he is believed to have been the first American black man to enter California. Fremont had two black men in his company when he was out mapping the West. Jacob Dodson and Saunders Jackson were in his company. It is believed, from what I could dig out of the research where I got their names, that they were probably free people of color. So there's been an influence of blacks in the West. Of course, I forgot one of the most important ones, James Beckworth. Was a member of Ashley's party, and he started out as a horse wrangler. He took care of the pack animals as they went out west, carrying goods, and then as they went back to St. Louis, carrying the furs. He worked his way from that up to, from being a wrangler to a cook, and later on to being a trader, and to being a head of a partner in a company. He worked his way through several other stages of excellence. At the end of his life, he owned a ranch in California and a hotel. So, influence of black people in the West has always been out here. It is, we haven't identified it. Now, to push this forward, Beckworth was one of Ashley's men. When Ashley decided instead of going up the Missouri, he would follow a river that had not been used that ran from Fort Atkinson in the eastern part of the Indian Territories across to the Rocky Mountains. He would follow that, and Beckworth was with him. And that river was the Nebraska. Of course, everybody, when I say that, they kind of look, I've never heard of the Nebraska River. You know it better by its French name. And anybody in here French, I apologize for this, but I thoroughly believe this. The French thinking their language is so beautiful, they had to name that river that the Otos called the Nebraska to Lepa. Anybody that's French, I apologize for the insult, but I can't resist. Black influence in the West has always been here. There is, post-Civil War, a movement. Not right away. I mean, there's few blacks drifting out of the South, collecting what they can find of their families and moving westward, trying to get in on the free land and the settlement territories. But one of the more noted movements comes in the late 1860s, early 1870s, and that's called the Exoduster movement, or the black people gathering in mass and moving west, leaving their sharecropper roots in the South where they were nothing but commercial slaves, and deciding, well, you want to not pay us, you can work the farm and we'll go west, we'll work ourselves. The Exoduster movement started, and one of the families, or two of the families, that had an impact, especially here in Nebraska. One is called the Spees, S-P-E-E-S, or S-P-E-E-S-E, depending on which one of my notes you want to take a look at. They moved from the Carolinas up into Indiana and then westward to a town in what had become the state of Nebraska with the name of Seward. They were in Seward for a few years, and the head of the family started a freighting company. He managed to get hold of a few mules and some wagons and haul freight. And his children went to a German language school taught by a German, I don't know if the man was a teacher or he was the head of a German family and a German community. So they learned to read and speak German and sing in German. But they had some very great musical ability, and so to help provide funds for the family, they would go out to different events in the community and sing. Well, at that time, minstrel shows were fairly popular, and people were expecting minstrel shows, so they were kind of, they weren't well received in a lot of places. If they were singing the German songs, they were fine, but when they went to singing in English, they weren't So they moved from there to a place called Westerville, where they're joined by a family named Spore, S-P-O-R-S, I believe. And between the two families, they created a small community at Westerville, where the family grew. And when the Spees children were old enough, they left home and went to Iowa, to Tabor College, to finish their education. A couple of the boys ended up with degrees in theology, and the girls ended up with degrees in music and teaching. And one of the girls went up into the sandhills somewhere and married a black cowboy. By the way, at that time, 1 in 5 cowboys were black. Now, that's a pretty dense population of black people in a limited community like that. But she married the cowboy, and the family was having a little bit of problems in the community, so they decided that it was time to maybe find a safer place to live. They would move. One of the older boys went out west to a territory that described itself as the equality territory, because they allowed women to vote. And anybody that's from the state of Wyoming, I apologize for this, but it's true. The only reason black people were allowed in or were allowed to vote was because of the federal law. That's why the Congress or the territorial Congress allowed the women to vote, was to counteract the black vote. And that's in several different resources that I've checked. But they found some land for sale by the Empire Land and Cattle Company. And it just so happened to be on the edge of the state of Nebraska and Wyoming. Just across the state line into Wyoming. And if you're interested in going there, you go to Henry. I'm not sure exactly how far north you go, but it's in the middle of a field. And from what I've been told, that you can still, if you go out there, there are a few foundation
And you can
marks.
see the cemetery.
There's a cemetery too.
The cemetery is not actually in Empire.
Right, but
It's south of Empire, and it's a Presbyterian church. And here's the catch. Everybody buried inside the fence line originally was white. The one black man that died was buried outside.
it's a great
But
story.
they lived there until 18. They had a general store, a blacksmith, a post office. They had a couple of other buildings there, and they had a schoolhouse. And they had a black teacher teaching the school, but for some reason the black teacher left. And they were waiting for a young man to come from, I'm not sure if it was Tennessee or Kentucky, to come out and teach school. And the state of Wyoming said, you can't do that, you can't wait, you've got to have a teacher. And we're sending one out. They sent out a white teacher. And the white teacher kind of drove the community crazy. And so around 1920, which, by the way, is the start of the Depression era, they decided it was time to move. Now, across the United States at that time, this was happening to a lot of black communities. One of the most famous black communities at that time, and even to today, is in central Kansas, west central Kansas. It's a town called Nicodemus. And I like to tell people that the whole town is a National Historic Site, but it's actually only a few buildings in there. But it was one of the largest and most popular and most productive black communities in the West. Well, they started these black communities that existed, the Deerfield, Colorado, Nicodemus, there's a couple other in my research that I can't remember their names. They were all experiencing the same thing. They would go to buy their supplies from the people they'd been buying them from for years, and all of a sudden they couldn't buy them. They would basically hoard their supplies to sell to white merchants and to white communities. I'm not saying they're prejudiced or anything, but weigh it with your own scale. But that broke a lot of the communities, and that broke a lot of them up and drove the communities out of existence. With Empire, the breakup took a little bit of time, but some of them drifted back into central Nebraska to a place called DeWitt, Nebraska. The Nebraska State Public Broadcasting had a program on Nebraska stories about DeWitt and the black community there. When I was doing research for this, I asked the people in Seward, Nebraska, if they could send me any information they may have on the black settlement at Seward. Guess how much information I got? This is something that I found in doing my research all across this for the other program that I wrote this one from. There was it's either they're denying that it was there or they don't want to admit it was there. There is one other community in the state of Nebraska, and actually in proximity to Scotts Bluff, called Hope. According to myth and legend, it was settled by the term that was used was darkies. Now, this has two sources. One, the term darky refers to free people of color that have never been in bondage. The other reference is to South African blacks. Now, I'm not sure if they mean from the country of South Africa or from the southern continent of Africa. But I found it unique and interesting. I went to try to find it. Local Historical Society doesn't have any information. The county, I went to the county for a map to see if they had an old map that showed where it was. The one place I didn't go was the Burlington Northern Archives. I don't know who to contact, and I don't know where they are. But it was a small community. Now, I'm thinking that it had to be one of those communities that built up when the track was being laid and they came to a stop to let the rail crew and bed crew catch up to them. And that's where this community was. And it's got to be somewhere along east of Nebraska, east of Scotts Bluff, as you're going down towards Minnetonka. It might be as you're going down towards, you get past Minnetonka and you're going towards Beard, but I can't find it. Anybody want to go in search of it? Have fun. But the history of Black America and Black influence in the Plains is a history that is hidden. It is a history that is suppressed, in my estimation. But there are some fascinating characters and some fascinating events related to it. I mean, think about it. Deerfield, Colorado was one of the largest most successful black communities in Colorado, or in that area. They had a treasury of $1 million. Less than 5 years later, they would be completely extinct. Nicodemus. By the way, not too far from Nicodemus, there's a guy named George Washington Carver, had a farm. What can I say? You know, these influences crop up all over. The state of Nebraska, prior to statehood, in the eastern part of the state, had slaves. There's a story in history, Nebraska History Magazine, 24 or 22, 2022 or 2024, about an escape by 2 slaves to get on the Underground Railroad. In doing the research for this, it was pointed out that the man that created Arbor Day also held slaves. That was something I found a little bit amazing because of, first of all, where he was living was not that far from abolitionist Kansas, and John Brown was active in that area. And I would just think that it would not be.
I'm pretty sure it's true.
Yeah. But well, I'm sure it's true because I found more than one source that quoted it and said it. But they existed all over. There were slaves here in Nebraska. And I just, because of abolitionist Kansas being so close, in Iowa, the history of Iowa, that you would think that it wouldn't be quite as, I'm not saying it was prevalent, but it was larger than what I thought it would be. Speaking of the Mormons, I just remember something. The first wagon train from the Mormons, that took the Mormons to, led by Brigham Young to Salt Lake Valley, there were 3 black men in there on that. And in 1850, when I was doing this, before I did this research, I was doing research on the Mormon Trail, and they didn't acknowledge that there were any slaves during the Mormon migration, but at the census, the 1850 census for Utah, for the city of Salt Lake, there were 24 free persons of color, 29 slaves. Of those 29, 18 were men and 11 were women. So how we identify people and how we see our history is colored by what we are led and to accept. So I hope I've scratched some people's curiosity. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of other stories that I've just been acquainted with recently that you might be interested in adding to your research. Robert Anderson was a former slave who had the first black homestead in Nebraska, and one of his homesteads was in Fox Butte County. And there's some interesting stuff about that.
There's a retired Buffalo soldier, Sergeant Major of the Buffalo Soldiers, 10th Cavalry, that was 10th Cavalry, out of Fort Robinson, that retired and built a farm just west of Fort Robinson.
Robert Wall Anderson's cabin's been preserved in Alliance at Dobby's Frontier Camp, and they've got a history of it.
Yeah, he got married when he was 72.
He was very wealthy. He honeymooned
He was very
in Europe.
And Jerry, I have his biography that his wife wrote, and I can loan it to you.
Okay, thank you.
And then there was one other story, and I do not remember the lady that gave us this story at the Art Center at during Black History Month. There was a family of former slaves that lived in Scottsbluff. He became a bricklayer, and I can't remember what.
Hayes Chandler and the Nickens family.
Okay, Hayes Chandler and the Nickens family.
That's a
Okay.
big book.
Oh, yeah.
That's 2 volumes. Legacy of African Americans in Western Nebraska by 2 reasonably local, I think they're from Alliance, Ruby Coleman and Sherry Hopkins. Believe it or not, I haven't read these. This is a lot of reading. I like historic research. I like doing it, but even this is a bit much for me.
That's the cabin I was talking about on the back
Yeah, on
of
the
that
back
book.
cover,
That's Robert Wall Anderson's cabin.
There's a cabin, there was a log cabin here in Nebraska over in the area of, I forgot, Lacey Park, I think it is. There was a cabin back there, an old, I think it was a soddy, but my wife told me that it was a log cabin, but I don't remember. I only found out about it when I first moved here and never did any more research. But do you have any other questions? Is there any?
Jerry, at one point you were talking about the 70,000 people moving up in Mississippi at one point, but then it broke off into 70 to 10,000 blacks.
7 to 10,000.
7 to 10,000 blacks.
And that figure, I don't know where they got that. I saw it a couple of times. That's the only reason I used it. But on the Trail of Tears, this was something that was common among Native Americans, is that blacks would escape from slavery, and often they would go to Native American communities and they would take them in, and the blacks would assimilate themselves into their culture learning their ways, learning, and taking on their religion, and whatever else they could do.
Then you said at one point, did the natives have slaves at times?
Oh, yeah, it's, believe it or not, the great Sakakawea was a Mandan slave. She was taken when she was like 5 years old.
Well, I meant natives taking black slaves.
Oh, taken, well, anybody could be a slave. They would, it depends on how you were,
Yeah,
where you were taken from. I mean, if I'm a black man living in a Cherokee village and a Creek Indian came and captured me, I could be a slave.
When we were in Indian Cave Park at the town of Brownville, I thought they said it was a black community.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was trying to rewrite this from another program that was very broad. And
Brownlee, I don't know, in Santos, but there was one when we were at Indian Cave.
yeah, there's so many. There were over 1,000 actual black communities. Some of them lasted less than a year. Some of them lasted for several years. DeWitte, Empire, Deerfield, Nicodemus. I mean, there are a lot of them out here, but not that many of them survived. And to do a research, to do the research and find everyone, when I started this program, I'd still be doing it. I'd still be doing the research. You can't touch them all. You can't research them all, and you have to kind of pick and choose where you. I just picked ones that were stuff that was, to me, was interesting. You know.
We really appreciate what
Thank
you
you.
did.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
I enjoyed doing this. I hope someday you may get a chance to see me do one that I've actually and learn what it says. But thank you for coming.
Thank you.